Mr. Ross is the dynamic leader of the Minnesota Orchestra. He's the leader of the cello section. He has been since 1991. He's a prize-winning cellist who's performed as soloist many times with the Minnesota Orchestra. And prior to that, he performed as the principal cellist of the Rochester Philharmonic under David Zinman. He has taught at the Eastman School of Music and performed at several music festivals, including the mostly Mozart, Colorado, and Rhodes Music Festival. He has an extensive biography, but that's a good snippet of it. I'm proud to introduce Mr. Anthony Ross. And we will continue with the masterclass portion of that.
Beautiful playing, beautiful playing. Tell me, what year are you in school?
First year of master degree.
And before you came to TCU, where were you?
In Beijing Central Conservatory of Music.
A lot of beautiful things about your playing. Two things that I want to touch on, I don't want to forget. Can you tune with the piano one more time? Give me an A. It's a funny thing with piano. Some of us play a lot without piano. We play out of string quartets, orchestra, whatever. And then when you come to piano, to playing with a sonata with a piano, it really is a different kind of intonation. You know, that you have to, you can't be so high with leading tones. And when the piano pings a note, for me, and I think it's general, we're actually having this discussion in our rehearsal today of the Ravel Trio, that it goes, so it starts just a little bit higher and then decays as it plays. And when the piano has a lot of notes going, the pitch you really hear is the ping, not the ring. And sometimes when I tune with piano, I get confused as far as how low or how high to tune. And if I ask the pianist to go like, four quick notes or something, then you really hear the true pitch of the piano. Try that once and see what you... Now. Well, you're actually a bit high, right? Anyway, I mean, it is really, I mean, it's something to think about when you... I had a teacher once who actually tried to practice with piano tuning when he was getting ready, and there is something to that. You know, it's a different kind of playing, and sometimes if you get a chance when you're working on a sonata like this, just to play it at about 60% of tempo, play it slow, almost a whole movement, just thinking about how am I melding with the piano pitch. I think that'll help you if you get a chance. Just do that for 20 minutes someday with whichever pianist you're working with. Because sometimes it was just, you know, I know we're all nervous too and stuff like that, and when we get nervous, we always play more out of tune, and we know that. But we don't want to. I mean, so I think it's something that it's great when you're playing a sonata to just sit with the pianist and maybe play even a whole movement just at 50 or 60% of tempo, and just for focus of pitch and rhythm and the inner voices and all that kind of thing. I think it's something that would help you on this piece. I also I was wondering about your bow, and you have a really full sound, and I really appreciate that. When you play, like the very opening of this piece, and you get into the upper half of the bow, so like in the second bar, play the first 3 bars for me. I want to hear the cello itself ring more. You know, piano voce it says, which means full voice, right? I had a conductor once tell us that meant to play piano, but that's a conductor. It sounds like this to me. I'm going to get a big sound. You're all alone, you have no competition with the piano. I want to hear, you know, a great Russian baritone would be with this voice that has huge lungs. feel like you're kind of forcing it out a little bit. I want the sound to be round and incredibly vibrant. Try one more time. So maybe don't press so much. And the other thing is, I noticed when you're in the lower half of the bow, you play with flat hair. And when you get into the outer half, you play with more, it should be the opposite. You know, the one thing with cello bow, if you want to play, the hardest thing for us cellists is to play with a big sound in the outer half of the bow. And the only way to do it is to flatten the hair. Well, there's more than one way, but this is the best way. Flatten the hair. In other words, instead of having it at an angle like this, have it flat, so your thumb is actually under the stick and you're getting your power this way instead of this way. If you squeeze this way with your thumb on the side of the bow, then you have to push, you're pushing the sound out. If you do this way, your back muscles enact and you get a lot of weight into the string. So if you play a so try not to press so much and flatten out the hair as you go out. Yeah, your cello has enough sound. And I think that's, I think the other thing, it feels a little bit, you know, we're reading black and white in the notes all the time. And we have eighth notes and quarter notes, and we have a time signature. And it feels straight to me. You know, I mean, you know, if you... so that really speaks, you know. There's ups and downs, you know, it seems a little flatlined if you're just going to play it full. Well, full voice is a wide range. You know, it could be from mezzo piano to fortissimo, I think, you know. So when you think of it as you would as a singer. A great singer, where there would be breaths, you would be running out of breaths, you would, and those types of things. And as you work on this piece, I think simple, playing simply will be more compelling than intense all the time. There's a simple aspect I miss when you play this. It's really a pretty simple theme. It sounds right now. You know, you play better than that, but it's very intense and somehow complicated. You know what I mean? And so I think it's one of those other things about playing musically. Occasionally, less is more. And I think sometimes you're over-exerting yourself in both hands, actually. And just play the second thing once. What is the dynamic? There is really no dynamic, is there? I mean, it's forte here, but I don't think it's forte here, is it? See how simple you can play with that theme. See, I just want to hear it. Yeah, sometimes, I think what I meant is, for instance, it sounds like I'm going to make the 16th notes really important. I don't think they are. You know, Prokofiev lived in Paris quite a while, and I think there's this Russian voice, but there's a French voice in this piece too, I think. And it has, and even when the very first tremolo you have, when you play here, you know, the character changes, and I want to just kind of doing a regular tremolo. I think it's suddenly, wait a minute, I'm in Paris, you know, I have to have a croissant, you know, and there's moments of that in this piece that are, I think, very French. So Play from the beginning once, and I'll stop you a couple times. Let's just, so think really open and free in this opening. And when the piano comes in, she'll control you a little bit. So, sorry to stop you. That's better. I want that connection to be smooth. There's something. And when you play the long note, and the piano comes in, converse with us. It's a conversation. This is not good here. That's not what he wrote, but something. And this is forte, but it's not bombast. I think after she plays this beautiful French kind of impressionistic thing, it's intense, but it's not like a trombone. You know what I mean? I think take these fortes as you have a big sound, and you don't need to force it. I think that's maybe the biggest point I want to make today, is that let your cello ring, and you can be freer with it, I think. How are we on time? I'm supposed to be we're good? So do one more time at the beginning, so I can really hear this conversation, you know, that you're really relating to the piano part. That's good. I want to, before you start, when you play, why don't you play harmonic there? I mean, it sounds right now not ringing enough. You know, I mean, vibrato on every note is overrated. I mean, I don't like to play dead notes, but a harmonic is certainly not a dead note. Right? I think so go ahead. I mean, it's about openness of the sound. Let the harmonic ring. Why don't we do some of the second theme before we stop? You want to start right on it, like 33? See, for me, if you sang that to yourself, which is something I always do when I'm practicing, it sounds kind of weird because I'm singing to myself in a practice room, but you have to think of it, team, for me it sounds like if you sang it the way you played it, team, I don't know if you mean that. You know, I mean, it has to have a clear line. If you want to phrase exactly the way you mean to. And you might mean what I just sang, but I don't think so. I don't think so. Because, I mean, if it goes to the long notes, really, you know, and so I think it's making it sound complicated with all the extra. You don't need that. Now it goes somewhere. Sorry, it's been 15 years since I played the piece. I'm actually playing it this summer. I have to relearn it. But you know what I mean. I think simplicity in how you're making your articulations and your phrasing will go a long way with this piece. And throughout the whole thing. And even at the end, when you have the fortissimo, it will sound more intense if you actually back off with your right hand. If you make it incredibly precise rhythmically, it can be more precise rhythmically, and you don't have to press so much. It will sound more fortissimo. Okay? Great, you're a wonderful player. It's nice to hear you. So maybe we should do the question and answer thing now.
So Anthony, a couple questions here. I was curious, you've had a long career, I assume, as a musician, and if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, and maybe this will apply to some younger musicians in the audience, what advice would you give yourself knowing what you know now?
You know, I've been a serious cello player since I was 14 years old. And as a 17-year-old going to Indiana University as a freshman, I think I had some really good advice people gave me. I went there to become the best cellist I could with a teacher I knew that could help me in that direction in many ways, and to invest myself. Here I was going to college. I didn't have to have 5 or 6 hours of classes I didn't care about. I could practice 6 hours a day if I needed to, and I could devote myself to the cello and my teacher's schooling. And the individual teacher you get as a potential performing musician is the most important thing. Your individual private teacher, especially when you are that age of going to college.
All right, thank you. You talked a little bit about practicing, and you spent a good half your time singing on stage. I know as you talked when you practice, you sing. So I was going to ask you, how has the goal and the meaning of practicing changed for you over your career, going from a student to how you practice now? How has that evolved?
I think the biggest change is, I think the best teachers teach their students how to teach themselves, how to hear themselves clearly, so that you know exactly what the audience is hearing when you play. A lot of teachers call that the third ear, where you have, of course, the 2 ears on your head, but you have the ear that you get a concept of what is projecting, what the audience is hearing. That happens with solo, it happens with chamber music, it happens with orchestra even. So, am I answering your question? It was about practicing and how it's changed. I think my practicing has become way more efficient over 40 years of playing the cello. You know, when you're young and you're practicing a lot, you play through a lot, you play a lot of stuff you don't need to practice. You know, it's always funny with kids, younger students, they always like to play the stuff they're good at and practice the stuff they're already good at, because it feels good to practice the stuff you're good at. So one of the reverse psychologies, you know, a lot of teachers use, including myself, is actually tell them that they're pretty good at something they're not, so that they go practice that. At the same time, practicing is such a delayed gratification kind of thing, and especially for young kids, younger than college age. I think the hardest thing when kids are 8, 10, 6, practicing cello or violin or whatever instrument, the kind of steady diet of practicing in a way to solidify your technique is something that is an incredible delay in the gratification you get. So if you start practicing a piece when you're 10 or 11 years old, and you practice it really well for 2 months, after 2 months, you're going to have gratification because you'll play the piece well. But that is such a delayed process, and string playing especially, because there are so many variables on string instruments. I have a son who is 17 years old. He's going to go to Indiana University on a trumpet scholarship, and he's a wind player. And not that it's not complicated to play a wind instrument, but for him, it's kind of, how does he blow? And that's oversimplification. But for us on the string player, first of all, we have this blank fingerboard, no frets. Where do we stick our fingers? How do we make our vibrato? Do we vibrato? The right hand is, where does the bow go on the string? How fast does the bow go? How much weight do we put in the bow? How does it go by the fingerboard, by the bridge? What angle is it at? How do we make it bounce? There are so many variables on a string instrument that the delayed gratification is even more. I was shocked with both my kids playing wind instruments, how fast they became good at them. Not great, but good, where they could play a beautiful tune. Literally within months of the beginning of their, on the instrument, they were playing some actually quite beautiful melodies. Doesn't happen that fast on strings. So.
I'm going to combine these two questions because I'm noticing they're kind of similar, and then we'll let the audience ask a few questions. How do you find inspiration to perform works that maybe you wouldn't, let's just say you wouldn't choose to listen to in your own spare time, that aren't your cup of tea? And also, how do you keep pieces sounding fresh that you've performed maybe hundreds of times? So how do you keep that energy there?
Well, you try, I try never to play a piece that I don't want to play. Occasionally that does happen in a concert. And you always find the positives in it. There's no piece, well, there's probably some piece I would never want to play again. But as a performer, if you've agreed to play the piece, you have to make the best of it and find the positives. There's no doubt about that. There's pieces I've played where I wasn't so thrilled about, but I tried to put 100% of myself into them, and I've got some of the best reactions from audience members occasionally on those times. So it might not be your cup of tea, but you, as a professional, you have to do that. Pieces I play over and over and over again. If you play a piece that much, it's because it's a great piece usually. I've never had to do one that isn't. And there's always new things. I usually don't get tired of any pieces. I mean, occasionally in the orchestra world, we might be playing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, for instance, for the 25th time in 25 years. And the conductor might not be up to snuff, and that gets a little trickier, and that's when the orchestra has to take over. But that's another thing where we actually do that. I played Dvorak Concerto. I played it a couple weeks ago, and my son, the trumpet player, the aspiring musician, asked me, "Dad, how many times have you played that piece?" Because he seems to hear me practice it sometime every year. And I said, well, let me think about that. I played it at least once a year. I've played the piece at least 50 times, and I still love the piece. And there's still things in that piece that before I perform it, I have to go back and woodshed it in the practice room. I have to take it slowly again, and I have to really, not as much, having that much experience on it, but I think repeating pieces over and over, there's usually a reason, because they're great pieces and people want to hear them, and we feel the same way as performers. I think a lot of the development of a third ear comes from extensive coaching in chamber music that I had all through my developing years, where we have a coach who's talking about balance and quality and what your voice means to the harmony, whether you're playing string quartet or whatever it might be, or a piano quintet, and also from experience from being in your position, listening to other groups. For instance, there's a very famous piano trio, the Beaux-Arts trio. Everybody's probably heard of it who's a classical fan. One of my teachers, Bernard Greenhouse, was the cellist for many, many years. But I actually wasn't that much of a fan of the way he played in that trio, because when he didn't have a solo, his part was always kind of embedded in the texture in the piano, and I always felt it didn't have enough presence. And you learn and you get your own opinions of what you want to hear. And part of it is when you're playing piano chamber music and you're a cellist, decibels, as far as dynamics, don't really mean that much. You're competing with this giant instrument, and you have to play actually quite a bit louder. Even if it says piano, I take that as a character marking, not a decibel marking. And developing that third ear, I think it came from just listening and being coached, and finally knowing your part well enough that you're listening more almost to the other parts than yourself when you're playing. That's a real key. If you're struggling with your own part, it's tough to have any kind of perspective on that third ear. So I hope that answers most of it. I like to sit here where I am. I think there's actually an oral advantage for the audience. I don't know why, but usually when I listen to a cello player sit over here, their sound becomes more enmeshed in the piano texture. And it must be because sound travels together at about the same rate. But I always feel the balance in a cello-piano duo is better when the cellist sits over here. There's more clarity of that. So for me, I always sit here. Plus the visual, I actually, out of the corner of my eye, can see the keyboard. And I like to see sometimes when the pianist is about to attack. So tomorrow, or when we play Saturday, when I play Rachmaninoff, I'll be sitting here. Well, yeah, both. Look, we try to play every piece as the composer envisioned it. At the same time, you have to make it your own as a performer. And it's a fine line for some of us. Maybe some of us it isn't. And you'll never really know. I mean, I'd like to tell this story. A couple of years ago, I played, James Macmillan is a Scottish composer. He's about my age, very popular, composing a lot of symphonies and concertos, and he wrote this big cello concerto. I think I played it, maybe it was 10 years ago now, actually. I can't remember. It was 05 maybe. And he composed it in 98. So I'm studying the piece. It's very long, very difficult. And I learned the piece, and I learned the score, and then I got a CD that an English cellist had made on the premiere, and I'm looking at it, and there's about 7 or 8 different notes the cellist plays on the solo part. So I called James Macmillan up in Scotland. I called him up, and I said, "Hi, James, Tony, I'm playing the piece, blah, blah, blah." And I said, but I've got a question about 6 or 7 notes and these measures, and he said, "Well, let me get the score out, and he gets the score. I said, "Well, I wrote that in 96. He said, "Which notes do you like better?" and so I said, "Well, I don't know, but I'll figure it out and I'll let you know. I'll send you a CD." So, some composers are incredibly detail-oriented. When Dvorak wrote his Dumki Trio, most of you probably know that piece. I played it in chamber music a couple weekends ago. He wrote that piece, and then he went to America. and was getting published while he was in America. And he wasn't there. You know, this is back in 1887, I think. He needed an editor of the piece, so he sent a message to Brahms. He said, edit my trio for me. And so the Dumke Trio, the version we see nowadays, is edited by Brahms. So, I mean, you know, I've also worked with composers, and one composer, he's quite famous, what's his last name? Sierra. And I was working with him a couple summers ago, actually in San Antonio, and I said, what's the first thing you do when you play a Beethoven sonata? He's a pianist. He said, well, first thing I do is make it my own. You know, so you have to, as a performer, you have to feel like you totally own it, or you can't play it. Well, it's certainly an expressive device to increase and decrease or stop and start your vibrato. That's a funny thing, starting vibrato at the beginning of a note is always, I've heard many people, or conductors and other people say, well, start your vibrato first and then move the bow. And I disagree with that 100%. I think the vibrato can start immediately. In fact, one of the keys for me for starting, it's very difficult. Hold on. This takes demonstration. If you're going to start a note, and let's say it's a tricky entrance, and you want the vibrato to start immediately, it has to be initiated by the left hand, not the right. That if you want to play, when I start that note, it's about the left hand actually pressing down the string and starting the vibrato to cue my right hand to start. It's not about my right getting this and doing this and then, I mean, I can do that, but it's very uncoordinated. The thing is, the hands want to work together. So if you put find my note here, and I've got my finger on the string, it is not pressed down, and it goes. So this motion of actually engaging the string with your left hand cues the right hand to start, and you will always have better entrances, and you'll be able to start the vibrato simultaneously with the bow on that. It's a really great device that some cellists teach it. Very few violinists and violists do, but a lot of fiddlers play for me these days, and when I tell them about it, they're like, oh yeah, it's a great device to think that actually engaging the string with your left hand will cue your right hand to have a clean entrance. So, it's a good question.